Right. Well, good morning, everybody. I don't see my slides yet. Do I have to click share, I suppose, again? Yeah, right. I will just get that done. Hit the button. And I think this is a good presentation to share. Let's have a look at this one. So good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see the screen beautifully this morning. What I want to talk about, really, I thought I would pick up on the key message of the whole PM Fair. And when Brian and the team approached me, I really loved this idea of the topic of black swans and unknown unknowns, and whether they're opportunities or threats. And if you know anything about Nassim Taleb's book, which he wrote back in 2007, you will know that it's crafted in personal anecdotes from his life as stories. And so I thought, well, you know, as I get towards the end of my career, maybe it's an interesting thing to share a couple of anecdotes from my life and my career, and we will explore this together. And at the end of this presentation, which is about 20-25 minutes, I'm going to invite my guests with me who are waiting in the wings. We've got Michèle Longpré, we've got Camille Emraz, we've got Brian Thumwood, and we've got Saskia van Dyck and Bertrand Potier waiting in the wings. And we're going to then really explore together in depth about the management of unknown unknowns. Do they exist? How can we do it? How can we get through them? And I think they're going to be able to share some very, very valuable and useful technical techniques and tips for us to enjoy. But let's get started anyway. The tale of two swans. And this little tale begins a long time ago, when I was about 3 years old. My father bought me a wind-up gramophone, because after the Second World War in London in the late 50s, early 60s, nobody wanted shellac records anymore. They were very cheap. And we used to go around these old junk shops together and buy stuff. And he bought me this gramophone and lots of records. So by the time I got to primary school, which is like 5 years old, I could really tell the difference between Mozart and Bach and Brahms and Beethoven and Debussy and Stravinsky. I really had a wide range from Mozart to Haydn. I could just by listening to this music tell who was the composer and what style they had and whatever. So before I could read, I was really learning this. So the music became embedded within me. And this is a picture of a wind-up gramophone, very similar to the one that my father bought me. And you see it's got a handle on the side where you have to wind it. And I was so young when I first got it, I must have been about 3, that my brother, my older brother, made me a little step which I could step onto, so I could actually turn that with my hands and wind the thing up. And after a few years, my father relented and he found an electric motor, which he then put in, so I only had to switch the switch on. Still, so as you can imagine, a young boy growing up, loving classical music. It was my life. My father bought me a viola, which is like a large violin. And when I was 11 years old, I joined the local youth orchestra. And this is not me, unfortunately. There's a lot of girls there. And that was the good thing about it. There were loads of girls. And even at the age of 11 or 12, they were very fascinating creatures to me. And, you know, this was a very great way of sharing a passion and whatever of music, and also meeting new people and doing some concerts. It must have sounded pretty awful, to tell you the truth. I wasn't a very good student. But by the time I was about 12, I discovered guitars. And this is a photograph of a Yamaha FG180. If anybody plays the guitar, you will know and recognize this guitar. And this is exactly the kind of first guitar I had. And I learned to play Bob Dylan songs and Donovan on all the different kinds of songs, and built up quite a repertoire, but very soon started writing my own songs. From the age of about 12, 13, I was writing hymns for the school and different kinds of songs, and my own songs about how hard life is as a young adolescent male. But, you know, I was learning my craft. And my dream by the time I got to sort of 1976 and a young adult, sort of like in my, you know, obviously my dream was really to be like Jackson Browne. Jackson Browne wrote songs for the Eagles. He was a great songwriter, and he could talk about love, and as you say in Flemish, verdriet, in such a way that it was really touched the soul. And this was my career. This is what I was going to do, much to the disappointment of my parents, because they wanted me to join the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, which really was not my thing. And I lived in a town called Beckenham. Now, this picture is obviously taken a long time before 1977. And you can see the church spire there in the background, sticking up there. And that was the St. Barnabas Church. And that's St. Edmund's Church, sorry. And that's where I was in the youth folk choir. And every Sunday, we used to have about 500-600 people coming to the Mass. Can you imagine? And I used to be playing the guitar, and there was one of the guitarists there, and it was a really great place to meet girls and to have fun. And after church, we'll go over the road for a cup of coffee, then we'll go around the corner to the building on the left where that man on the bicycle is. And that building there is a very famous building now, because it's called the 3 Tons, and it's a pub. So we used to go into the pub and have a drink. Now, why is it famous? Because my older brother, who's 7 years older than me, was a good friend of David Bowie, and all the people hung around together in Beckenham. That's where we lived. And David Bowie, that is, basically started his career in that pub. And so this is the 3 Tons. And so basically I kind of followed on in his footsteps. By this time, 77, Bowie has gone to Berlin, and he's living in Berlin above a chip shop in Berlin. But he's had some successes in the UK. I mean, not nowhere near where he got to. And although I thought my songwriting at the time was pretty cool, of course, I didn't have the genius that this guy, that Bowie had. Well, here's a picture of Bowie in the back of the pub, around the time my brother's there, but he's not in that picture, I don't think. But there he is with his guitar and smiling away, and you can see this lovely girl on the right-hand side absolutely adoring him. And he was a very, very charming man, but he had a very bad singing voice. That's what everybody thought at that time, and that was one thing that he and I did have in common. The only thing is that he learned to improve it and get it really good, and I didn't bother. Because a black swan came into my life. So you can imagine me poised on my singer-songwriting career, trying to get contracts with EMI, trying to meet people, wasting a lot of my life because of the fact that I was trying to meet agents who could get me a contract, and that was a very difficult, and I was relying too much on other people. And later on, after this black swan came along, I decided never to wait for other people, but just do things myself. So this is a typical interior of the pub. And there was one day I was sitting in this pub with my friends after the church choir. We're all having a beer together. And a friend of mine comes in and he says, "Harley, I've just heard the most amazing record. You can't believe it." I said, "Well, what is it? Who's the band?" And they said, "It's Anarchy in the UK, and it's by the Sex Pistols." I said, "The Sex Pistols? What kind of name is that? They will never allow that on the BBC." And indeed, they didn't in the beginning. And by coincidence, about a week later, I actually got a chance to hear this song. I was at a party, again, surrounded by all these girls and having a lot of fun. And they were playing songs by Al Stewart, if you ever knew what he was, a nice singer-songwriter. And I was boring a young lady by saying, "Listen to his finger picking on his right hand. You see, he's got this double hammering technique. Isn't that clever?" But the next minute, someone put on Anarchy in the UK. And this was the first time I heard it. And it was loud. And all these perfectly nice people suddenly turned, well, I don't know, they just went wild. They started jumping in the air and up and down and knocking things over and crashing. And I thought to myself, my goodness me, this is not music. These guys can't even play, and they probably don't even know what anarchy means. And one of the girls said to me, "Harley, you've got to chill out and get with the groove," basically. And yeah, I was an old man. I was basically 20 years old, and they were just 18. I mean, they were just kids. So that crash, that bash into my quiet life, this song, Anarchy in the UK, well, it was, really such a massive impact. And suddenly, my competition were looking like this, and people were spitting at them, and they were even opening their mouths to allow people to spit into them. And there was violence, and this was definitely not what I imagined for myself. And you have to imagine, you know, it was incredible what was going on here. And the alternative was brotherhood of man, for God's sake. I mean, this was definitely not where I wanted to be. And let's just put it in context. You know, this is 1977. I'm 20 years old. The Queen looks really young, and I look young too. I was young, and I had long hair, and all the people were having street parties because she'd already been on the throne for 25 years. It was a very special thing. You had this duality between basically punk rock and then this other world. So I decided there and then to give up my musical career, much to the grateful thanks of all the people who knew me and the nation. And I actually got myself a job at Brook Street Bureau, which is an employment agency. So basically I needed a job. So I walked into the agency and I said to them, listen, you know, I'm looking for a job. And there must have been something about the way that I communicated with them or whatever, because I hadn't got any experience. I hadn't got a university degree. I dropped out of college and education. And they said, the next thing I knew, I was working for them. And it was actually an amazing job. And if you know anybody in your life and you want to give them some influence, and you want to give them some advice and they don't know what to do for a career, well, get them to work for an employment agency just to start off with, because I met every walk of life in there. People would just wander in off the street, and there would be secretaries, there would be accountants, then there was even a sommelier once. I didn't even know what a sommelier was, you know, a person who chooses the wine for hotel, restaurants and whatever. So I had a lot of fun, but I learned a hell of a lot about how to get companies to pace their jobs with us, and also how to interview people and find out whether they really could do the things they said they could. Because if you sent them off for an interview and they couldn't, then the company used to be very cross with you and then say, don't send me people like that. So that was a very useful experience and skill that will come back later in my story. So, excuse me, one day I was in the agency looking at all the new jobs that had come in, and a job came in for this amazing company which was made concrete blocks. Now, you might not think that's a very amazing thing, but they were looking for a marketing person to travel the country and work with the sales team and the marketing team and to learn photography. And I was really into photography. It was kind of a hobby of mine. And that's why there's no pictures of me when I was younger, because I was always taking pictures of everyone else. And the others are burnt. Anyway, so this is the company I work for, a concrete block company. You might think it's not very interesting, but it was great because we were battling against timber frame housing. And I learned about market share, growing a market, killing your competitors, not literally, but marketing them out of the business, smear campaigns in marketing and everything. I learned all sorts of things about life and marketing there. And one day I was sitting in a bar in Bristol, I remember it clearly, and the big sales director of the whole company came in and he said, "Oh, Harley, you're all on your own. Are you all set up for tomorrow?" I said, "Yeah, everything's ready for your show tomorrow for you and the sales guys." And he said, "Forgive me, but you don't seem to really look and feel like a Salcon guy." That's the name of the company. And I said, "Well, what makes you say that?" He said, "Well, you seem very artistic, very creative, and I think you're capable of a lot more than what you're doing for us." And basically, I said, "Well, George, that's very perceptive." He said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, what I really want to do is to be set up my own business and marketing and photography and stuff like that." And he said, "Well, why don't you?" And I said, "Well, you know, I haven't got any money. I've just bought a house, got a big mortgage and just married. You know, basically all of those things. And I haven't got any photographic equipment. I haven't got anything, and that's expensive." And he said, "Well, you need to go into sales, Harley. You need to go into sales, learn how to convert a lead into business, because you're going to need that skill when you're running your own business. And also you could then meet a lot of architects." He said, "Why don't you work for a brick company?" So he put me in touch with this really top brick company. And the next thing I knew, I had lunch expense account. I had a fantastic company car. My salary was almost doubled. And I was entertaining the top architects of London, telling them about my dreams of photography and buildings and light and color, because my dad was an architect. I lived and dreamed on all the stuff he used to talk about that I found boring when I was 14 was now very useful. And I was getting loads and loads and loads of business. So I was getting very successful. By then, Margaret Thatcher had come onto the scene, and she was changing the world dramatically. I mean, she was a blunderbuss coming into this country and just tearing politics and everything apart. I mean, it was incredible. Everything was thinkable as possible. And the city of London, to the right of it, there's a Docklands area. It didn't look like that then, but basically it was just a derelict site. And it became the biggest building site on the planet. I mean, Shanghai hadn't even started at this stage. And so I had loads and loads of photographic work. And I was basically earning obscene amounts of money for a person of my age. I don't even want to tell you what it was, but if you're earning that today, it still seems like a reasonably good day rate. And this is a very long time ago. And at those days, they had a term called yuppies, you know, these young, upwardly mobile professionals. And I hated them. They just so, to me, seemed so shallow. And they had their Porsches and their Saab turbos and all that lot. But looking back on it, I mean, I must have looked like a yuppie because I had a mobile phone and this was my car. The one on the left, I had this classic Jaguar car that I had completely restored. And my friend bought a matching one. His was dark green, a Daimler. Mine was the Jaguar 420. And I kept that car for years. And this is my daily runabout car. So, I mean, what was I? I must have been a young, upwardly mobile professional. But I don't want to glorify Thatcher, and I'm sure deep down she was a very nice person, but it's really important to understand that she wanted change, but she was the world's worst change manager and actually didn't achieve that much, not at all as near as much as her person who followed her, John Major, who did a hell of a lot more, but quietly, and nobody even knows his name because he was more diplomatic. I mean, from the beginning, she had created a division with the miners and the miners' strike, and her solution to this was just to go on and confront these miners. And you know, it was really like a civil war. It was unbelievable. We'd not seen anything like it. Okay, she had inherited a really aggressive trade unions who were not aggressive physically, but they were striking all the time and productivity was at an all-time low. And indeed, something had to be done. But instead of seeing the unions as a part of the solution, she saw them as the problem, the enemy, and they needed to be destroyed. And it was just, everything was a battle. In the meantime, she also had civil riots going on and race riots going on. This is Toxteth. I mean, this is really burning, you know. It was a real problem. The Thatcher years were definitely a big, big contrast years. And then, of course, we have the Falklands War. You know, I don't want to go into the politics of the Falklands War, but there's lots of books written about it. But all this was happening at the same time. And then we have the poll tax. I mean, she couldn't leave it there. She decided to change the taxation system. So depending how many people lived in the house, the more tax you pay, because you paid per head. Well, that meant poor people with lots of people sharing bedrooms had to pay them more tax than a single person living in a big posh house in London, or even in a palace. And the people just weren't taking it. It was an incredibly difficult time and time of massive change. And indeed, the IRA were also at the same time, that had been going on for a while, bombing and blowing up parts of London. And this is how they actually blew up the hotel in which Margaret Thatcher was staying in. But because she was such a workaholic, I think it was like 3 a.m, she was still working and writing her papers. So actually, she was in another room and she didn't get hurt. But it's a miracle that she wasn't killed. Some people were. Now, all of these things happened, and I told you about 2 black swans, but I'm just sneaking in another one, because this is the second black swan now. And basically, Thatcher introduced something called the multiple mortgage tax relief. I don't know if it was her idea or not. Dennis Lawson was the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and it seems pretty innocent, to be honest with you. It just meant that at that time, if you had left university or college, or you had some friends, because houses were so expensive, that you could come together without being married, and you could just get a mortgage together. And so you could get your first property together. And she decided to stop that, but not to stop it immediately. She said, we're going to stop it in 6 months' time. So what did happen? Everybody rushed out to buy a house or a property of any kind before it stopped. House prices flew through the roof. Inflation went up. People ended up buying the houses and couldn't afford to live in them anymore. House prices crashed down, and everybody, this is a typical picture of the time, of every house in the street for now suddenly for sale. It was desperate. Everybody was trying to sell their house before the others because the house prices were crashing, and you were ending up with negative equity, i.e. your house was worth less than the amount of money you borrowed, and inflation was running at some awful percentage. It was a horrible, horrible time, and it killed the entire building industry and my business overnight. I survived just about by getting rid of all my assets and paying off all my debts and ending break even. I didn't go bankrupt, but it destroyed, it was ultimately the thing that brought Thatcher down. A very sad ending to a very aggressive reign. And I ended up back in the brick industry, selling bricks again, whilst working out what to do next. So then suddenly, a third swan comes along, which I'm completely not expecting. And this swan came about because my cat was sick, and I took my cat to the vet, fell in love with the vet, ended up marrying the vet, and the vet was Belgian, and I came to live in Belgium. And basically, that is the story of my black swans this morning. And by the time I got to Belgium, somebody said to me, you're so wise for a man of your age. I mean, this was in 95, work it out. And I thought, wise? I can't be wise. But I've worked out over the years, what is wisdom? Wisdom actually for me is an algorithm of knowledge, learning how to play a guitar, a musical instrument, how to recruit, how to do something, how to sell, how to do marketing, how to do any of the things that we learn. That's the knowledge, the reading the books, the studying. And you multiply that by the experience of applying that knowledge and experience of life. And indeed, actually, that makes you wise. And I joined a software company who had been going for 6 years, and they had all these software engineers, but they had no concept. They were making amazing technology, but no concept of marketing, no concepts of sales or pricing or finance, any of the things that I knew about through running businesses and having had such a diverse career. So that was really set me off in a good direction, and the rest has been plain sailing from there with all these beautiful white swans. In this, just to close this, I was just thinking, do black swans really exist? And apparently they do, and they live happily in Australia. So they're quite common, apparently. So it's time for me to introduce my panel. I hope you found that interesting. I don't know, we're going to now go straight into the podcast recording, and I'm going to introduce my panel. So the podcast we're recording is called Planning for the Unexpected: Black Swans, Unknown Unknowns, Opportunity or Threat. And it's obviously based on Nassim Taleb's book, The Black Swan. The first guest I would like to introduce you to, of my 5 guests this morning in my virtual podcast studio, is Michèle Longpré. Executive Director at Gordian Management, Michèle gave the opening talk at this year's PMI Fair on the topic of building organizational resilience. Coming from an industrial background in the aircraft industry, today Michèle is an experienced management trainer and a coach. She joins us on the line from her home in Switzerland. Camille Emraz, Director Program Management Lead for Strategic Projects for the global biopharma UCB. Kamil was recently mentioned in an article by Bloomberg as being on the list of the world's top 50 next generation leaders to watch. Not surprisingly then, Kamil likes to take a strategic long-term view while enabling the connection between strategy and operational execution. Kamil is connecting with us from his home in Brussels this morning. Welcome. My next guest, Brian Thumwood, Director of Global Billing, E-Billing and Online Payments at DHL. From starting his career in a position as an accountant in the UK, today Brian spends his time championing financial and IT transformation projects that increase efficiencies and fuel growth. Brian's key words are eliminate, simplify, automate, and be curious. Brian joins us from his home in Tervuren, Belgium. Good morning, Brian. Saskia van Dyck is a program management advisor for Goodyear Dunlop. Saskia is an expert in business planning, process engineering, forecasting, and cross-functional leadership, and is the president of PMI Luxembourg. And last, but by absolutely no man's least, my good friend, Bertrand Potier. Bertrand is the managing director of corporate equity, liquidity, and bank treasury professional services Europe for the high-tech US bank payment company FIS. Bertrand states that his objective in life is to bring a sense of purpose to both the individual and the organization and create a culture that motivates them to work together, be they employees, clients, or suppliers. Bertrand joins us from his home in Poland, a truly international panel this morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome all. I would like to begin with you, Kamil, if I may, and ask you, well, when is a black swan really a black swan? Do they exist? What's your view on this?
Sure, Harley. Hey, first of all, before we get into the questions, thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. And big thank you to PMI for hosting such a wonderful event over the course of the last week. This is my third event that I'm participating in. So you guys have really given me some work this week. But it's all been worth it because it's been such a great way to try to deal with the current situation that we all find ourselves in, and it's a little bit of a black swan, although arguable, because some could say that pandemics have been around for many years. There was one in the early 1900s. So is it truly a black swan? I don't know, but the consequences for many on an individual level, professional level, community level, family level are unprecedented, and definitely we have to deal with that uncertainty. And to kind of share with you a little bit of my experience over the course of the last few months and how I've been dealing with a lot of uncertain situations, I'd like to start with the fact that when I was actually hearing the news about the pandemic starting up in China and so forth, we were getting ready for a trip to Spain. Actually, we were planning the baptism of our little baby boy, whose name is Alexander. And so we took the whole month of March off, and we decided to fly there to be with my wife's family, who are Spanish. And that's when the crisis hit. And so our flights were basically canceled to come back to Belgium, and we were stuck in Spain, for the whole time of of confinement. And so
I can think of worse places to be stuck in, eh?
Well, yeah, it's definitely, but it's funny because Spain was kind of one of those epicenters of the pandemic where it was really scary to be in at first. Later, when things cooled down, you betcha, it was a great place to be, because I did bring my work laptop, so I was able to connect from home, and not really home, but from where we were. But what I'd like to share with you is, when things like that happen, and when it happened for our family, our first immediate kind of emotions were fear, uncertainty. What are we going to do? How are we going to get back home? And we started thinking about what's most important to us. So basically, as a family, we started to prioritize where's the safest place to be.
I want to come back to prioritization in a minute, Kamil, because I think
Sure.
That's a really, really interesting point, because you're looking at now, where are you, and you're assessing that situation.
Yeah.
So I'd just like to nip over to Michèle in Switzerland briefly to on the topic for you. What is a black swan for you, Michèle?
Well, I think there's a few that comes to mind. And if I go with your story, you can see that, you covered about 20, 30 years or 40 years.
Sorry.
not wanting to put numbers in. And you could see that there's quite a bit of black swans in there. And you could feel that, although you were talking about yours, you could see how people must have been hit along all of these events. So yeah, there's been quite a bit. For me, at one point in my career, with my husband, we were both happily going forward with 2 careers going well, both independent. We had both created our company and everything else. Things were going well. And we decided to build our dream house. So we had a big land, we split it in half. And on the other half, we started to go in and build our dream house for us. And unfortunately, we got hit by crooks that were friends. And we got swindled for quite a bit of money. So we basically lost a lot of money, lost a lot of assets, and our life completely changed right there. Now, is it a black swan?
Well, you weren't expecting it.
I mean, we have seen it coming. A lot of people are saying today, "Oh, you could have seen it coming," and I never got swindled, and I don't know why you got swindled. So you always hear this a little bit, but at the end, as you said, though, there are opportunities, and the story goes on that we have opportunities afterwards with that. Yeah,
of course, and I'm sure we'll come back to those too, because I mean, obviously, as Taleb says, I mean, he's talking about the impact of the highly improbable. I mean, it is highly improbable. I think most of us have bought houses or whatever. Hopefully, none of the rest of my panel this morning have been swindled in that way. But that's an awful thing to do. But we'll come back and we'll develop that a little bit further, if I may. I want to rush back now to Belgium, into Thumwood, with Brian. Brian, I mean, you come from an accounting background. You're a numbers guy. I can imagine you like structure and you order, and you also you're a PMI member of long standing, I remember. Tell me, I mean, what's your attitude to this concept of, unexpected and all the rest of it?
It's interesting. What do they say? That hindsight is the exact science. And a bit like Michèle was saying, we should have really expected these. And with this pandemic, there's some people that say that Bill Gates, with his YouTube talk of 2015, anticipated this. Whether it's black swan or not, whether it's expected or not, the bit that interests me and the reason for the theme is some people make it an opportunity and some people see it as a threat, and it's how people react and it's their mindset that's different, that you can turn it into an opportunity and not make the most, I don't like those words, but make the best of the situation. Yeah,
but you work for DHL, don't you? And I can imagine that for DHL, business is better now than it's ever been. Or am I wrong? I imagine it must be going pretty well. I mean, all the numbers of parcals that are coming to my house, I must be responsible.
You're not wrong.
For some of it.
You're not wrong.
No. Bertrand, I mean, I know you're kind of you look at life from very acute angles. Tell me, what about this black swan? I mean, is it a science for you, like Brian was talking about?
No, it's not a science, but indeed, I live my life and my work as a risk manager. So my mind.
Is that how you see it, a risk?
Well, yeah. I mean, that's a risk that eventually I've not been able to necessarily predict. Like, for example, getting my first child after a very famous fertility specialist told me 4 years before that would never happen.
Yeah.
Right? You can't plan for everything, but I acknowledge that. And there's power in that acknowledgement, right? But bringing that to a conscious level that you actually can't predict everything, even if my brain is literally wired for risk management. Yeah. People tend to tell me, you see things 2 years ahead, which I believe, it's been told many times. But I also acknowledge that there are actually elements of your life and of your profession that you literally indeed can't plan for and can't anticipate from a risk manager perspective, right? But that consciousness, which I believe actually that's what Omar Taleb is referring to in a way. You need to be conscious about the fact that there are the risks that you can manage and anticipate, and there are the ones that you can't. But just being aware of it.
I think we'll develop that further. because I think that's very interesting about this management. And I know, obviously, most of our audience are managers of some kind, and project managers, leaders. And I think we'll also touch on leadership in this topic, as well as versus management in this topic, because I think they are obviously very different things. The leadership is going to be taking us in a new direction, and a new vision, a new opportunity. And the management is like, how do we actually make sure that the parcels still leave the DHL depot? But before we do that, I'd like to bring in Saskia van Dyck from Luxembourg. Saskia, Black Swans, what is that for you? Is this something real, or do you think it's just part of normal life? How do you see it?
I think Black Swans for me probably needs to take me back to a point in my life where I really had a U-turn experience.
Okay.
You said Saskia from Luxembourg. It's actually Saskia comes from Tervuren, the same places where Brian is sitting right now.
Oh.
I grew up in a family that was prospering after, post-war, etc., and bright future for the kids, and work hard and path through university, and you're going to get those degrees and you're going to have a great career, and it's all about achievements. And I did really well in school, studying languages, until the point where I wanted to go to university and chose to go to university and do study psychology, which was a completely different era than it was really what was interesting for me, but it was a completely different era than what I did before. And make a long story short, I completely crashed and burned. Within the first 6 months, I had my very first failure experience probably in my life, and I didn't know how to cope with it. At the same time, I'd fallen in love with a guy who lived and worked in Luxembourg. And you know what? I just decided, that was my black swan. I decided I'm leaving home. I'm going to make the jump, and I'm going to live in Luxembourg, and I'm going to go to work. So
you had to tell your parents that you're quitting university, you've fallen in love. You're going to go to Luxembourg. I can imagine there were some heavy conversations.
Yes, and you can argue whether it was their black swan or my black swan, because they certainly, and I was definitely the outlier. I can, if you go back to the definition of a black swan, it had extreme impact for me because it completely changed the way my life turned.
Yes.
Turned out super well. I do not regret a single decision, but it was a completely different path.
Fantastic. Well, now that brings us nicely back to Kamil, if I may. Kamil, as I said in my introduction, you really like to take the strategic long-term view, which sort of brings a parallel with Bertrand and what he was saying, like looking 2 years ahead. But I also know that you're very much involved in trying to inspire and bring the youngsters on. And I want to come to this touch the word science and planning. Black swans, let's just call them, let's forget the black swans for a minute. Let's call it, unexpected events, major unexpected events in projects or in companies or in business or whatever it is. Kamil, is this something that we can manage? Is this something that we can, how do you go about this? How do you see it?
Yeah, it's a good question, Harley. So definitely we have in the field of project management tools, techniques, and methodologies to go about trying to do our best to manage risk, whether it's from a threat or an opportunity perspective. But in this realm of uncertainty, rapidly changing business environment, this whole notion of a black swan environment, we can do our best to try to plan for what we can't predict, but there are things that are just so difficult to predict, and even if we have heard of them before or talked about them before, it's hard to put the resources into making sure every single aspect of your business is secure, right? You have finite amount of resources, and so you need to invest in the right things to drive your business forward. And so, sure, the pandemic's been talked about by Bill Gates. It happened 100 years ago, but who could have thought that it would happen again to this extent and put us in a situation where the whole world has basically gone virtual? And so what I think is, change is the only constant, right?
Yeah.
As Heraclitus said,
Yeah.
And I said this in my presentation earlier this week. Today will be the slowest day of change that you will ever see. So it's only going to get faster as we move forward into the future. And so we need to, and that's what I try to tell young people. It's like, you need to be proactive in how you build yourself in terms of the right competencies, the right skills, the right leadership and business acumen to be able to maneuver very quickly and rapidly changing business environments, right? And the Pulse of the Profession from PMI came out, I think, 2 weeks ago, to 2020 version. And there they mention one of the 3 big ideas that has resonated with the people that they spoke to was trying to future-proof your workforce. And what does that mean? Well, that means trying to get people to be more, let's say, future ready, more agile, quick on their feet.
Is that a difficult point? I mean, I'd like to come back to that, Michèle. You're in the coaching world, and you're training for organizational resilience. You've seen this firsthand. Coming from an aircraft industry now to all sorts of industries, as an advisor at a senior level and at a personal level. I mean, what Kamil's talking about there is this agility in people, but are people agile? Are they naturally agile? What's your experience? Can they be this perfect person?
For me, I think this agility, it depends on the personality. You have to look at the different personalities around and all that, and that can be trained. Agility can be trained.
Really?
Yes, I do believe so. You have people that really like, a safe road that is all planned. And we probably have Bertrand here, who's probably this type of blue. If we look at the colors, he's probably a very blue-green profile, Bertrand. And we want it safe, and we want to plan everything, we want to calculate everything. And then you have these other profiles that are more like working with volatility and optimism, and you even call them opportunists if you want. But I think it's to learn to work with these combinations of people and to make them work together, to find this capability to adapt using the strong data, and using that data from these personality type to be creative.
But Michèle, I want to bring you on this because you are our expert on coaching and training. So let's assume we've got an average group of people, and some are more rigid than others, right? And so imagine I can run 100 meters, I don't know, in a minute, right? Because I'm not the fastest we should be. And the fastest person on the planet can do it in 9 seconds, right? So probably with a coach, I can get from a minute to half a minute to maybe even 20 seconds or 30 seconds or whatever, I don't know. How far is it possible? Are you saying that with the techniques that you have, or with that are available today, that it is possible to train agility into young people, to coach them into agility? I would say, is it?
Yes, yeah, I do believe so, and not only into young people. I think in everybody, even older people, even us, we can develop this capability.
Well, if I had you around in 1977, maybe I would have stayed writing songs, and maybe I would have written Golden Brown for the Stranglers. You never know, huh? But obviously it didn't happen. That's a bit of a shame. And coaching obviously is something new. Saskia, you're also involved in coaching, and I wanted to bring you back onto this because you're coaching more on, if I understand, into the project teams and on the business process and planning and stuff. Saskia, what's your view? The agility point. Can we coach our old fuddy-duddies into being more agile and having more skills like Kamil was talking about?
Yes, absolutely. I do think that it's people like me who can translate those skills that might be a little difficult to access when you look at them from a theoretical point of view, but translate those into how does that work in reality, and how do you apply that? I think translating is the best word I can use for it, to bring it closer to the people who don't find that quite so natural. But also, just like in general project management, which has tools and techniques that can help us cope with black swans. are often I refer to as just common sense and things that people don't call it like that, but they do it all the time anyway. And I think that's true for a lot of agility aspects as well.
Okay, well, because that gives us hope, Brian, because I know that you started your career as an accountant working for a brick company who took over the company I was happily working for at one point. And
that wasn't my fault.
Yeah, it was probably your fault. I split off and went self-employed. But the thing is that, you know, I can imagine when you started at let's call it Redland Brick, it was a very traditional British company with a good return on investment. Probably your parents at least may have thought you're going to stay there for life, huh?
Yes, as was their careers as well. You joined a company and you stayed there for life. But I just wanted to reflect back on that previous conversation, because we had a great presentation from Jerry Murray yesterday about leadership. And we were talking about people that lead with their hearts and people that lead with their heads. And actually they were talking about the perfection that is somewhere trying to reach in the middle. And naturally you have a propensity to one side or another, but you can train yourself. And the illustration that Jerry used.
Picking up on Camille's point, because I want to come back to leadership a little bit later on, if I may, because Kamil was really talking about the young people today need to have a backpack. So probably they need to know finance and a little bit of marketing, a little bit of sales, or they've got to do this, and they've got to be good communicators. I mean, that's very different, from the beginning of our careers, right? Where we were really more boxed into departments and into roles in departments. How are you seeing that evolve in your experience at DHL? You know, are there people like Saskia around and Michèle? Is it coaching, or are people encouraged to take on, even in financial areas, more skills, more interests?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm running a digital transformation program in our office where we're teaching people, old and young, about the emerging technologies that most of them have a fear of as well. So that they can embrace those technologies. But the key thing is about the mindset, and that's back to the opportunity or threat as well. Some people see the digital revolution as a threat, whereas actually it's an opportunity. But again, we're trying to break out from the pigeonholes. You know, I'm not a great, yes, I'm an accountant. That's something I did and something I passed. But I'm trying to get the whole organization not to focus on job titles or boxes, but skills and people. If you're a good communicator, it doesn't matter whether your job title is director, VP, leader, or what have you, but it's working out what skills people have and getting them to embrace those and apply them in the new world. So
it's interesting, because that's a kind of diversity. So we're trying to find that in organizations within the team, like Michèle was also talking about, looking at these different types of people and blending them together. And Kamil is saying, yeah, but the next generation, because this change is going to be so exponential, the individuals themselves will have to be more agile. So they will actually, so there'll be more diversity, if you like, within the individual. And Bertrand, what's your experience? I mean, you're on the other side of the table supplying technologies to companies like DHL, like UCB, I suppose, and others, and Goodyear, that are allowing them to make multiple payments into banks and that kind of thing. So you're, on the one hand, your projects have got people working on them who are working for you, but they've also got to understand the customer in a very way, because your programs are very customer oriented. You're doing it for the customer, really, with that integration. How can you bring, as you said in your ideal thing, the clients and your suppliers into that agile way of thinking, or this new way of thinking, so that when the unexpected happens, you can handle it in an efficient way?
But there are many things, right? First of all, I mean, I think I'm not a planner. This is not about techniques or hosting. There's a mindset. We said that, right? There's a mindset that we need to get into the head of, in my case, my consultants, my project managers, but indeed my clients as well. Camille mentioned that as well. The only constant is change, right? So, for as much as you can plan things, and we do plan things, you know, we do have to project a sense of confidence, formalizing the things that we can formalize and make them as expected as they can be, but with a healthy dose of, readiness for change, right? With a healthy dose of, again, consciousness that even us, which have likely, you know, hundreds of years of collective experience, eventually what that collective experience has been telling us is that for as much as we can prescribe, for as much as we can plan, there's indeed going to be a number of things that won't be expected, right? That are changes to which we need to adapt.
I'd like to take you back 3 or 4 or even 5 years, when I think the tradition was that a company like, you know, like Bayer, DHL, Levi's, whatever, you know, the big brand companies, they would have a meeting, a procurement manager would have a meeting with you and say, look, you know, I want your fancy tools and I want them installed on Wednesday. And by next month, we expect everything to be working on your system. And it has to be just like my friends at DHL's or whatever. And what you're saying is obviously over the years, this trend that you've had to coach even your customers into thinking in this agile way and saying, look, the world is changing so fast. By the time we've developed your solution, it's probably out of date. Is that kind of where you're going?
It's not necessarily it's out of date, but basically the message I sent to them is 2 things. First of all, actually, I need to assess your own kind of readiness and mindset towards this and towards change. That's which is unusual. Eventually, it might not be the first conversation you actually want to have with a prospect, but that still is very much needed conversation. And second is, if I'm selling you something for 100, 80% eventually, if I'm good, is what I can plan for and what I can anticipate and what I can really make sure happens as in a rather prescriptive way. But even with our experience, 20% is still something that you need to foresee for changes.
Okay. Just going back to Brian, if I may. Thank you. That's really interesting. So these changes that you're talking about, Bertrand, Brian, in your strategic projects where you're saying eliminate, simplify, automate, be curious, I mean, I guess even in your organization, there are unexpected things that happen in these programs that, you know, I don't know what they could be, maybe budget changes or whatever. Brian, how do you relate to what Bertrand's just been saying about that? Is it 80-20% in your experience?
Yeah, I'd say that was a pretty good rule. Yes, and for me, it's about the simplifier as well. That when those unexpected things come along, it's creating order from the chaos. So yes, they're unexpected, but it's how you deal with them.
And that's something that you like to do in your programs, I'm sure. So Kamil, how do you feel? Are we all old fuddy-duddies when we're talking about this? Or how do you respond to what you've just heard from Bertrand, myself? Because I know Bertrand's a very forward-thinking person, and I'm more a traditionalist, or come from a really different generation, I suppose. When I started my career, there were no computers on the desk. So, I mean, how do you react to this 80-20% rule? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, no, I think, to be honest with you, I agree with what the other panelists are saying. There's a bit that we can plan for, and then there's a bit that we absolutely can't plan for, and we need to cope with it on the fly, and we need to have the right mentality. And that's what I hear, you know, being repeated throughout this conversation is it's that mindset. But the question is, how do you kind of, you know, get your people on that same wavelength? Because indeed, we're talking about, you know, you allude to different generations, right? A different generational thinking, and that has an influence on how we operate in the workplace, because each generation comes with its own assumptions, its own norms, its own ways of working, and so the true, let's say, project leaders of tomorrow are those people who can bridge the differences of different generations, of different countries, of different industries, and pull them together and try to carve out a path forward. And so that's definitely a challenge, because it dives into the soft skills of project management. It dives into communication. It dives into conflict management. It dives into, you know, influence. Those competencies that are more difficult to build, but are becoming more and more important as we move forward, you know, in these very times, right? So when those unprecedented or unpredictable situations happen, I think then we need to have those people who can tap into those skills and be able to make good decisions, prioritize. You know, I mentioned that a little bit in my introduction, prioritize accordingly, and be able to pull in the right people to tackle those problems. And Pareto principle. That's all about prioritizing
I think
the important 20%.
I suppose we come back to the fact also, we should resharing the fact for our listeners, is the fact that you have come from the biopharma and you do strategic projects there. So I can imagine quite a lot of your projects are delivering products of some kind that people are going to have to use and engage, and they have to work. So I can imagine you can't just be totally agile in everything, because you've got to have some sort of, well, you've got to have a structure, you've got to deliver something that's reliable and dependable as well, I can imagine.
You're right. And the pharmaceutical sector is maybe a sector that is traditionally slower moving than other sectors. But there's an important reason for that, because indeed our product is medicinal products, and we want to ensure that the patients get, at the end of the day, the products that have gone through all the processes and all the checks to make sure they're at the right quality, efficacy, and safety, right? But that's not to say that the pharmaceutical sector is not trying to catch up. And I'll tell you what, PMOs are popping up all over the place. Digital transformations are being done by the major pharma companies. So there is a lot to learn from other industries that are so much more advanced, that haven't, really embraced methodologies like agile thinking and mindset. And I'll tell you what, I'm seeing more and more the pharmaceutical sector trying to jump into those fields, of course, where they can, because for certain processes you can't just go agile like that. But for others, like when you're looking at a biotech process and you have equipment with a lot of data coming out, and you can optimize yields and so forth, that do not have that big of, when that data is not kind of critical GMP data, I know there are ways to try to optimize that to do more with less, right?
Well, I think you and Brian ought to have a cup of coffee together. I'm sure you have already. But I would like to move. Thank you very much for that input, Kamil. What I'd like to do is move the conversation on a little bit, because my panel today, ladies and gentlemen, are very experienced, and I would like to ask them more about the leadership thing. Let's look at the unexpected event. So we've got the unexpected event. So the first thing is the panic reaction. So like, how does it affect me? Will I still have a job? Will I still be alive? All of those emotional elements at the beginning. And then we've got this person who comes down the hallway and says, and it's probably Bertrand, and he's going to come down the hallway. He says, you know what? There's an opportunity here. We've got an opportunity. Maybe we could actually do this, this, and this. And then suddenly we're all thinking in a different way. I want to discuss now, starting with you, Michèle, the role of leadership in this, because we've got the management of keeping everybody calm. And I think project management and disciplines and all the things that you guys do traditionally in your management role is kind of well documented. What I'd like to know a little bit is, what is the leadership? What is the role there for them, Michèle? Or us to act as leaders? What would you say there?
Thank you for asking me this. Actually, leaders have a lot to do in order to make sure that you do have the right mindset in the organization. Culture needs to be developed, and that needs to be done not when you are in the crisis, not when you're facing that black swan. It's a continuous culture development that you need to do into your organization. This, what we call this cognitive oneness. We've always in the past been developing we were teaching knowledge is power, knowledge is power. Yeah. And the way people interpret that was that if I keep my knowledge, I have power, which was the wrong interpretation of that. It's the shared knowledge that gives you power. It's the fact that you are building on each other's knowledge in order to move forward and grow that builds knowledge. And that's a culture, that's the mindset. So you do need to develop organizations capable of adapting to all of the data, the information.
Michèle? Sorry, Michèle, we lost a little bit there. So we need to start again. We need to develop organizations that build
that builds on this capability of cooperation, collaboration, sharing knowledge, and constantly gaining new insight from everything that is happening across the organization.
I want to challenge you here, because Bertrand's saying he's just come down the hallway and he says, look, I see an opportunity here. And it's nowhere in any of the programs that we've planned for this year. Okay. We've got Brian's teams all with their programs all running nicely along, and this thing is now suddenly happening. So we need leadership now. Do you believe that this leadership role of and Patrick Thomas writes a very beautiful description of leadership in the foreword to my book, Inspirational Leadership. And he writes there, leadership is taking people somewhere other than where they're headed. So, you know, in February, we all went into work and we all drove our cars in a certain direction. And then suddenly something happens. And now we're heading in a new direction. And someone like Bertrand's come down the hallway and says, look, you know, there's an opportunity here, So the role of leadership there, getting people to inspire people into another direction, is that also something that we can coach into people, younger and older, not just the top people?
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I was saying, is that it's a building. And the day you need to switch that quickly, then the people are capable of steering along with you. They're capable of doing this switch. And we saw it in March. We saw some organizations. I'm consulting in a lot of organizations, and I could see some of them did the switch, did the turn. I had to do the turn. I'm doing a lot of intervention face-to-face, travel all over the world. One day to the other, you're not traveling, you're not going, and you need to now to develop your skills on the virtual. So, and I could see how quickly some organizations did it. Some others, it took 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and still some are resisting. Still some are saying, we'll wait a little bit. So it's in the culture that you build into your organizations to have that capability to move fast.
Okay, I'd like to come over to Saskia with your coaching of the project skills and those sort of things. I mean, for me, it's always a question of the difference between leadership and management. As I said, management is making sure that the parcels leave and things get done and the bills are paid. But then when we've got these major interruptive events and unexpected events, and we want to turn them into the opportunity that Bertrand's expecting for his team or his client or whatever, we've got to get our project management or some of those people to start taking leadership, start doing things that they've not really done before. Saskia, how do you go about that? You must have had programs in the past that have suddenly changed directions or had to take on new scope or something.
Yes, thanks for that question. It's in the role where I am at the moment is actually it's actually evolved. I think to address this need, it's actually evolved from teaching how to manage projects to teaching how to lead your teams. So I'll be giving them tips and tricks in about or leading them towards how do you take your team from direction A to direction B and manage to do that shift with the whole team. And I'm not doing that with people that are in the C-suite. I'm doing that exactly with the project leaders, project managers, and the project teams.
Okay,
part of it, I think, is sorry.
Yeah, well, no, that's great. No, absolutely, it's perfect. It gives me a lot of hope. So I'm just going to quickly go around the tables now and just see where we are. What is our conclusion? So basically, Bertrand, from listening to everything you've heard today, what is your conclusion on this topic, on managing unknowns, and what is your conclusion?
So there's the first thing that we mentioned, actually, I think that is diversity, right? We need a diverse group of people who actually be able to deal with unknowns, because some will be obviously resisting changes, others will see opportunities, others will basically sit in the middle of the pack, but still be helpful to organize whatever needs to be organized to deal with those unknowns. And so we need diversity. That's number one. Number two is there's no tools for this, right? Yeah, well, there is a mindset. There's a mindset of actually people who, again, will understand, for example, the first level of an emotional response, which we all have, we're humans, but will be able to actually go past that and actually trigger positive, again, risk manager, opportunity manager type of rational mindset, and actually be able to lead a diverse group of people to actually work together on managing this change, managing this risk, managing this opportunity.
Okay, so Brian, thank you so much for that. That's a beautiful summary there, Bertrand. Brian, how would you conclude? What do you take away?
No, I'd echo Bertrand's comments about the mindset that's come up all the way through, and then what Camille said as well about the soft skills. Ironically, in the digital evolution, there's more and more dependency on those interpersonal and soft skills, and they become more critical. So understanding what's your sphere of influence, what you can control and what you can't, and then handling how you react to that. How we got here, we can deal with later in lessons learned. How we go from here is the critical thing.
And Michèle, your conclusion. Thank you, Brian.
To me, I like Tato said, necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that's exactly the explanations of the Black Swan here, is that capability of facing that huge unknown that is hitting us and say, okay, I'm going to take this chunk by chunk. I'm going to take this bit by bit, and I will see where is my opportunity, where is somebody else's opportunity, where are our opportunity, and grow from it. And yes, it may be a downward whirlwind, but somewhere along the line that you're gonna catch that opportunity and you're gonna move forward. Yes,
that's fantastic. And Saskia, thank you so much, Michèle. Saskia, for you.
For me, to conclude on leadership, it's important that when a black swan hits, that we, as leaders, take time to set goals, to really understand where is it we want to take us collectively from this point where we didn't think we would end up, and be very clear and concise in setting priorities, goals, communicating that in a very consistent manner throughout the organization. I work in a really big organization, so that is extremely important. Allow everybody or guide everybody in the organization to find their new purpose, connecting into those new goals. And then last, but I think is important as well, is while you're sorting all of this out as a leader, make people understand that it's okay to feel wobbling and to feel the uncertainty, and encourage people to reach out to each other and make it all a safe place. Make it okay to show vulnerability, because it makes it a safe place for each other, looking out for each other. Many organizations, many teams set up these coffee break meetings. All of that was just taking care of each other while we're trying to sort out where we're going and what everybody's role is going to be in that.
Well, that's really great. So, Kamil, last but no means least, to you, what's your conclusion from this meeting, from this little discussion that we've had here this morning?
Yeah, wow, it's been a great discussion. I think my fellow panelists have really hit all of the important topics, right? Bertrand mentioned diversity, leadership. We heard about vulnerability from Saskia. These are the things that help us get through these difficult times. We heard about skills as well, having the right skills, soft skills. I don't know. It's I think you guys have done a great job summarizing. I don't think I can. I think I'll just be repeating what you guys have said. So I'll just say I agree with with my colleagues. You guys have done an awesome job.
Oh, no, Kamil, thank you so much. Listen, well, actually, you've been leading it in many ways, maybe without realizing it. But now, listen, I'm going to tell, I hope there's nobody from PMI listening in at this stage, because I'm going to share a secret about my podcast recordings. Well, what I do is we all say goodbye, and we say goodbye, but we don't actually go. And then I will just turn the tables and I'm going to ask you one more question. So first of all, we're going to do our first goodbye, and then I'm going to ask you one more question. So listen, thank you very much, Michèle. Thank you, Camille, Brian, Saskia, and Bertrand. It's been fantastic talking with you this morning and listening to your insights. I'm sure our listeners have got a lot to take from it. So from me in Belgium, in Tienen, from the Sugar City, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye.
Ciao.
Goodbye.
So, right, next thing. What the next question is, I need to ask you, don't go yet. Right, okay, what did we forget? What should we have mentioned that didn't come up? Was there anything that we you can put your microphones on now, just what have we not covered, panel?
Yeah.
Or did we cover everything? Maybe we did.
Well, I think we did cover again. I think
Yeah.
it's the mindset thing. There's an element again of coaching and mentoring